Good afternoon. Welcome to the Tuesday, March 10th, 2020 Board of County Commissioners Land Use and Public Hearing. Would you please stand and join us in the pledge? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you, everyone. Mr. Engels, do we have certification of our agenda?
We do, Mr. Chair. Items 2A and B and 3A, none of which required specialized notice, are reviewed and fine to consider at this public hearing. Item 3B required published and mailed notice, mailed to property owners and taxing entities. Published notice was on February 13th. Mailed notice was also on February 13th. With that, you have proper notice and jurisdiction to proceed on all items on your agenda.
Thank you, Mr. Engels. Do any of the commissioners have any disclosures for any item on our agenda today?
I have none, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
And I have none, Mr. Chair. Thanks.
And I have none. First item under land use is the Eldorado Acres Track A and fee waiver. Project file SB 2020-002, presenting for staff, Jeanette Barr.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. Jeanette Barr, representing Planning Services. The project before you is Eldorado Acres Tract A, project file number SB 2020-002. The property is owned by Mitchell and Jennifer Dawson. The primary request is for replat approval to convert a 10.6 acre non-residential tract into one single-family residential lot within the Eldorado Acres subdivision. In addition, the applicant is seeking a waiver of the replat application review fees assessed by Planning and Engineering Services in the amount of $1,000. The intent of the replat process is to provide for the review of a replat of either an existing subdivision plat or a superblock final plat. The process begins with a submittal of an application following a review period by referral agencies and the public. There's a public meeting held before the Board of County Commissioners. Referrals in this case were sent to the Division of Water Resources, Tri-County Health Department, the Colorado Geologic Survey, and Public Works Engineering to ensure that the parcel had no significant constraints to development and that a home could be served by well and septic. The Eldorado Acres HOA noted that it was fully in support of the request. The only significant comment received was from the Douglas County School District requesting the minimum $500 cash in lieu fee for school land dedication. In a subsequent letter, the district indicated that it would defer to the Board of County Commissioners' determination on the applicability of the cash in lieu fee to this type of project. The property is zoned rural residential and is located near State Highway 83 and the Arvston Road intersection, just north of the Douglas-El Paso County line. You can see it outlined in red. This is a closer in view that shows Tract A at the northeast corner of the subdivision. The Eldorado Acres subdivision was platted in 1969 and contained 31 lots and one tract. From staff's review of the records at the time of approval, Tract A was intended to fulfill the 6% public land dedication request per the requirements of the county subdivision regulations that were in place at the time. However, the tract was never conveyed to a public entity and no request for public use has subsequently been received from any public entity over the past 49 years plus. The Eldorado Acres HOA considered this tract to be a residential lot, and it's reflected as such in its CC&Rs. Staff could find no records that indicated the tract had previously been converted to a residential lot. However, this replat request is intended to settle the question and allow the applicants to develop or sell the property for residential use, should you approve the request. This is an excerpt from the 1969 plat. 31 of the parcels are labeled with a lot number, and then up in that northeast east corner, which you really can't read, that 10.6 acre tract is labeled as Tract A. For this replat application, there is no formal subdivision-like exhibit. Staff has crafted an approval certificate which notes the change in name of the parcel from Tract A to Lot 32. We're able to do this because there are no boundaries changing on the plat. The legal description of the boundary is the same. The approval certificate was included in your staff report packet. Oops. Here's some site views. This is looking along Arston Road, looking north. You can see it's a typical gravel rural street. Tract A is on the left, and then there's an A1 zone parcel to the right. This is a view from that same vantage point looking more directly at Tract A. You can see that the parcel is relatively flat and has limited vegetation in terms of trees and scrub oak. This is looking across the road at the A1 parcel. This is a view at the southern boundary of Tract A that is shared with other Eldorado Acres lots. And this is looking at the most directly abutting Eldorado Acres lot to the south. Most of the lots in Eldorado Acres are 5 acres in size. And as part of the courtesy notice, we did not hear any objections from any of the landowners. In fact, there was one positive comment from a neighbor received. The approval standards for a replat are listed on this slide, and they're discussed in detail in the staff report. Should the board find that the approval standards for the replat are met, the following proposed conditions should be considered for inclusion in the board's motion. 1, prior to recordation of the replat approval certificate, technical corrections to that certificate shall be made to the satisfaction of Douglas County. Number 2, concurrent with the recordation of the replat approval certificate, the applicant shall record a quitclaim deed for the newly established Eldorado Acres Lot 32. And then finally, the third condition, the board standard condition, all commitments and promises made by the applicant or the applicant's representative during the public meeting and or agreed to in writing and included in the public record have been relied upon by the Board of County Commissioners in approving the application. Therefore, such approval is conditioned upon the applicant's full satisfaction of all such commitments and promises. Section 706.06 of the subdivision resolution sets forth the parameters for the board's determination on replat requests, as noted on this slide. Finally, there would need to be a separate motion on the fee waiver request. As I mentioned, it was $1,000 for planning and engineering review fees. Fee waivers are considered by the board and approved at its sole discretion. That concludes my presentation. The owner, Mitch Dawkins, is here today and has a few brief remarks for you.
Questions for Jeanette?
Thank you, Jeanette, for the information. I'm a little bothered that there seems to be some missing paperwork, but as I understand the packet, perhaps when the courthouse burned in 1978, some of these documents that would help fill in the blank were destroyed. Is that right?
Potentially. That's why I think we can't say for certain that there was never any action converting this tract to a lot. We don't have any record of it. We can't find it, but it's possible that something happened in that fire. I don't know that we have a strong feeling on that one way or the other, but clearly at this point we think the best course of action is to clean it up with a replat.
Thank you.
So Jeanette, thank you for the presentation. I'm wondering about the 6% public land dedication, and by approving the replat, and maybe this is a question for council, do we have the authority as the board to overcome the original 6% public land dedication per the subdivision resolution that was in place at the time?
You do have the authority. You can apply current regulations to the situation and determine in your best conclusion whether it meets the approval criteria and therefore whether it can be approved. So we can, the board can always change land use standards over time. So even what was appropriate in the 60s, 70s, 80s, or beyond could be readdressed by a now current board. So yes, you have authority.
Okay, thank you, counsel.
And just to say, as discussed in the staff report, if this was a typical replat where we were splitting out and adding a new lot, we would typically apply the $500 cash in lieu fee for schools, $250 for parks. But as you saw in the staff report, and as the applicant will probably testify, there could be some reasons to perhaps not apply that fee if you think the nature of this is, given its age and possibly lost paperwork.
Jeanette, can we verify how long taxes have been paid on this parcel?
I don't know how
Property
long
taxes.
they've been paid. The applicant might be able to address that, but it is currently assessed as vacant residential, so it does pay taxes to the school district. And it probably has for some time.
Have we checked with the assessors to see if we know how far back they?
We could do that. I have not done that, but I don't know if I could get online quickly and look at that. Maybe the applicant has some idea. I could have somebody make a quick phone call.
And I
if
did
that
look
would be-
back for a few years back and recognize that there's been taxes paid at various amounts, no doubt, but that might be something you could check on, see if we can just pull up a website,
Okay,
even just for the last couple of years. I think it gives us good information.
okay, we can do that.
Thank you. All right, no further questions for staff? This time, all right, with the applicant, the Mr. Mitchell, I believe? Yes, and right here at the lectern. You should be able to just speak right into the microphone there. It'd just be able to, at standing height shouldn't be a problem.
Okay.
So if you would state your name, the spelling of your last name, and your address for the record, please.
Okay. My name is Mitchell Dawson. Last name is Dawson, D-A-W-S-O-N. The address for the property or my physical?
Probably your physical address would be
physical
fine,
address?
yes.
Okay, it's 11667 Spectacular Bid Circle, Colorado Springs, Colorado 80921. Yeah, so good afternoon. Thanks for having us. Yeah, when we purchased the piece of property back in June of 2019, we were under the assumption that it was, you could build a single-family residence on the property. There was no encumbrances on the title or anything like that. I've spoke to the title company, and they have no record of where, it was any encumbrances or, that it was supposed to be dedicated for public use. We were originally going to my wife and I and family were going to build on there and kind of had a few change of plans, and so we were going to sell it, and the potential seller spoke with the planning department. That's kind of how this issue came up, that the tract dedication or the tract designation versus lot, and not being able to build a single family residence on that because it's labeled as tract versus lot, and that public dedication, and kind of through some records and handwritten notes and potential records that may have been burned. We just thought it'd be best to go through this process to kind of convert it from tract A to lot 32, just to clear up any records and kind of make it clear from here on out. And yeah, so that's and then on the assessor's website, I can't remember off the top of my head, but I think property taxes have been paid for at least, I think, since 1969 or 1970. I'm not 100% sure on that. It's been several weeks since I looked at the website. Yeah, so I guess, we're just, requesting that it be changed from tract A to lot 32. That way, we can, the piece of land is usable, for someone to build on and to make it usable, basically.
Thank you. Questions for the applicant?
I have none. Thank you.
And I have none. Thank you, Mr. Dawson.
Thank you.
Okay, very well. At this time, I'll open up for the audience. Anyone in the audience like to address the board regarding this item? Please come forward. Seeing no one, we'll close public testimony. Bring it back, and I know Jeanette's looking up some. You haven't found anything. Okay. It might not matter so much there, Jeanette, if we have to. As I can at least report, I had looked and seen that the property taxes had been going back at least for a couple of years and been paid.
And Commissioners, you've been handed what I've labeled Exhibit 1 for this hearing item. It's notes presented by the applicant.
It's going to take a minute to review Exhibit A, or Exhibit 1, I'm sorry. Discussion for the board.
Mr. Chair, I have a question I'd like to direct to Mr. Ingalls. When Ms. Bear was giving us the report, she indicated that the school district would like the commissioners to decide if there should be payment due to the school district or not, is what I heard Jeanette say. So can you give us some advice on what that question is? I don't see any motions about that or how we should handle that situation.
Well, I'll do my best. I did see in the packet that they were going to defer to the county commissioners whether or not to impose their standard fee. I can say that I've been at a lot of these hearings, and that is a standard request that they make for residential units. For every residential lot, they request a certain fee amount. I do not believe that it is yours to impose. I don't believe the county has regulations, nor do I believe the county is authorized to have regulations with respect to the school district. That said, I don't believe the applicant addressed that particular request, and I think it might be appropriate to ask that he do so. But do you have regulations on the books where you could impose this requirement? I believe the answer to that is no.
Thank you, Mr. Ingalls.
You know, looking at the application here and recognizing that the owner has faced some serious challenges as a result of a cloud on title, I think it's incumbent upon us to clear up and clean up those clouds on title so that it's marketable. So I would be in support of this application based on that and the fact that, from my view, it appears to meet all of the approval standards.
It's a question, Mr. Ingalls. Mr. Ingalls, did I hear you recommend if the request regarding the school fee is there, we did not hear that from the applicant? Are you suggesting we call the applicant back up to just ask for clarification?
If that would impact the board's decision, I believe that that is an appropriate thing to do. If that would not impact the board's decision, I think you are free to apply the approval criteria.
His comment, since it's not one of, I know it was requested in there by the school for us to look at, but since it's not something for us to impose, I'm just going to make a comment. I'm not interested in imposing upon the applicant. I'll just put it that way, since it's, again, not under our approval. We did see that it's a request in here in our application, in our documents we have before, so I'm fine going forward with that without having the applicant address this again. Okay, good. Getting nods. Okay. Commissioner Thomas?
I think what was important that I heard is that all the abutting landowners were contacted, and there was no information received that anyone was opposed to this, that everyone always believed it was a residential lot, so this isn't any surprise to anyone. I believe that the approval credits, the approval standards have been met, and I am in support of this project.
Somebody asked that we address the first motion, and then we'll come back for a discussion on the fee waiver. So if everyone's prepared to address the first motion.
Mr. Chair, I have a motion to approve a replat of El Dorado Acres Tract A with 3 conditions as presented, project file SB 2020-002.
Second.
We have a first and a second. No further discussion. And I would just note that there was not a condition put on the application requesting the $500 for school dedication. There was not. I just want to make that clear. Okay. All in favor, state aye.
Aye.
Aye, the motion passes. Congratulations. Now we take up the fee waiver request of the total of $1,000 to the county. Discussion?
I know we always like to treat everybody the same and be consistent with what we do. However, it seems like there's been a lot of commotion about what this tract or lot actually is. And I would be okay with waiving the fees for these citizens.
And I would concur.
Yes, and I will concur too. And also, when we look at this coming forward as a residential lot, we know there will be permit fees required or at that time it comes forward as a residential lot. So I would be in favor of that also. So ask for a motion.
Mr. Chair, I'll make a motion to approve a waiver of application fees for the replat of El Dorado Acres Tract A, project file SB 2020-002.
Second.
We have first and second. No further discussion. All in favor state aye.
Aye.
Aye. The motion passes. Congratulations. Thank you for bringing it forward. And we apologize for the confusion because it was certainly probably a big surprise to you all the way around. So our next item on our agenda is the Perry Park Summit Preliminary Plan Number 1, Approve Extension, Project File XT 2020-001. Presenting for staff, Matthew Jakubowski.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. Matt Jakubowski, representing Planning Services. The item before you is a request for extension of the preliminary plan approval known as Perry Park Summit Preliminary Plan Number 1, XT 2020-001. We have Brett Patrick, the property owner, in attendance. The applicant is requesting a 2-year extension of its 37-lot preliminary plan that was approved in 2012. For context, the site is in Perry Park, outlined in blue here at Red Rock Drive and Perry Park Boulevard. And here's a bird's eye view for some additional perspective of the site. The main access to the site is from Perry Park Boulevard here. And with that, we have Brett Patrick, the property owner, who's available for any questions you may have related to the request. And I'm available if you have any questions on our report.
Very well. Questions for staff. We'll get to you in a minute there, Ms. Patrick. I'm sorry. Questions for staff at this time?
I have done, thank you.
I have none.
Very well. I just have a clarification that I believe the original conditions of approval, there were 10 conditions of approval originally, and presented to us in the staff report are 11. Is that correct? The original application had 10 conditions of approval, Matthew?
Matt Jakubowski for staff. The original approval had 11 conditions as shown in the report that we provided.
Okay, very good. And the same 11 as we have presented today?
Yes, that's correct.
Very good, thank you. Thank you for that clarification, appreciate it. No further questions for staff? And Mr. Patrick, would you like to address the board? And if you would state your name, spelling of your last name, and your address for the record, please.
So my name is Brett Patrick. Last name is spelled Patrick, and I live at 4227 South Bel Air Circle in Inglewood, Colorado, 80113.
Thank you. And would you like to present anything more than what has been presented so far?
No, I mean, I can certainly answer any questions and try to provide additional information. We had been kind of renewing the extension for the last few years via kind of a letter, and then Matt and his team would approve it, and then Matt, I think, kind of saw some change to the rules and said that we need to come before the board and ask for permission to extend, which is hopefully what we're trying to do. And our goal, I say our goal, it's really just myself, I'm the developer now, is to get the project going as soon as we can, financially make it feasible as far as the lot price lot prices in Perry Park, kind of getting to that 150,000 or so average for a 1 acre lot. And then that will kind of make it to where, I can break even on what I've gotten into the project for what I paid for it and all the interest carrying and everything else. Originally, the project was started by my dad and my brother. They bought the lot, the 70-acre parcel back in 2002, the end of 2002, with the intentions of separating it into, multiple lots. And they, worked on that process for a number of years. I was not involved at all until probably somewhere in 2005 or 2006 when I started helping out making interest payments and funding some of the engineering and costs and everything else. So as a kind of an equity partner, long story short, there were some significant medical issues that came about with my brother. And so I ended up working out a way to buy him out as well as my dad to kind of try to make things a little more pleasant around the Thanksgiving table. And so that's how I got into it. I'm a commercial real estate finance guy and have done some residential home building, but I'm not a Shea Homes or Ryland Homes or Richmond or one of those guys. But certainly my goal is to, as soon as the numbers, and we're getting very close now to the numbers working, so I'm asking for a 2-year extension. However, in the upcoming 3 or 4 months, I intend to get updated bids on putting in the infrastructure and utilities and everything else. And assuming that lot prices continue to go up, they were about, roughly $100,000 per 1 acre lot in 2018 in the area, and then they went up to about $125,000 in 2019. If they continue that trend, we should be in good shape to kind of get started, this summer, winter with kind of, the final platting and moving forward. The 2-year request is so if it's not there, that we don't need to come back and do this again, next year, but certainly, amenable to figuring out what works. But that's my goal, is to get it and get the lots ready and sell them and kind of move on with with this, and have some other residential home builders and stuff buy the lots, the best developers and builders in that area.
So you've had some administrative extensions, and it now comes after so long, it comes back to the board.
Yeah.
We, the board.
Yes.
That's what you understand. Very good.
Correct. I think that changed at some point, and Matt and I realized that. So that's kind of what we're doing.
Very good. Good. Questions for the applicant?
I have none.
And I have none.
Thank you, Ms. Patrick. This time, I'll open it up to the audience. Anyone in the audience like to address the board regarding this application? Seeing no one, we'll close public comment, bring it back to the board for any discussion and or motion.
Mr. Chair, I have a motion to approve an extension of the approval of the Perry Park Summit Preliminary Plan Number 1 until March 10th, 2022, subject to the original conditions of approval. Project file XT 2020-001.
Second.
We have a first and a second. No further discussion. All in favor state aye.
Aye.
Aye. Motion passes. Congratulations. Thank you. Our next item is a Burning Tree Square Central Service Waiver Request. It's project file SP 2019-108. Presenting for staff, Jamie Rice.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. Jamie Rice, representing Planning Services. The project before you is a request for a waiver from the zoning resolution, project file SP 2019-108. The project representative, Alan Westfall of Storage Development Consultants, is here on behalf of DKS Investments today. The request is for a waiver to a provision in the zoning resolution, which requires the provision of central water and sewer services for new development located within the commercial zone district. Central water service is defined as services provided through a Title 32 special district and sewer service through a centralized wastewater collection and treatment facility providing at minimum secondary wastewater treatment. The applicant has submitted a site improvement plan request to include self-storage units with one unisex bathroom and landscaping areas, which will require on-site water and sewer services. The applicant asserts that central water services cannot be feasibly extended to the property and that the site can adequately be served by an existing well and an on-site wastewater treatment system. The property outlined in blue is located east of North State Highway 83 and north of East State Highway 86 in Franktown. The property is zoned for commercial uses, including retail sales and commercial storage. Here is an aerial of the subject lot. The blue line indicates the new lot configuration as determined by a concurrent application for a lot line adjustment. The waiver process is outlined in Section 1 of the zoning resolution. The process requires a written request by an applicant. The waiver request is considered in the context of an associated land use application, which in this case is a site improvement plan. For site improvement plan related waivers, the board considers the request as a public land use hearing. In this case, the site improvement plan included a referral period and courtesy notices of an application in process. The request for the central services waiver was noted as a component of the application. The Franktown Citizens Coalition submitted comments objecting the site improvement plan and the lot line adjustment due to compliance with the comprehensive master plan. No comments were submitted regarding the waiver request specifically. The Division of Water Resources states that the well, as permitted, can be used to serve the self-storage facility and has no objections to the use of the well provided that the terms and conditions of the permit are met. Lytle Water Solutions, the county's water consultant, submitted a review of the request and found that the water demands and the water supply are adequate to meet the needs of the proposed uses. Tri-County Health Department submitted a review stating that a concurrently proposed lot line adjustment would result in the on-site wastewater treatment system to be located on Lot 2A and would require an easement. The applicants have revised the lot line adjustment and an easement is no longer required. Tri-County Health Department also states that a final use permit was not issued for the construction of the on-site wastewater treatment system for Lot 2A at the time of construction, and a permit will need to be acquired. The applicant has acknowledged this comment but has not yet obtained a use permit. Tri-County Health Department has no concerns with the use of on-site wastewater treatment systems for the proposed use. The applicant has submitted an initial site plan that depicts the location of a proposed storage building, parking, and landscaping. The site improvement plan is still in process pending the outcome of the waiver request. The applicant estimates a water demand for the project of approximately 0.5 acre feet based on the county's commercial structure demand and the anticipated irrigation for landscaping. This demand can be served by the proposed well, which is permitted to withdraw up to 0.8 acre feet annually from the Denver aquifer. Pursuant to Section 122, the waiver must demonstrate compliance with the following provisions in order for the board to approve the request. The approval standards are listed on this slide and discussed in detail in the staff report. Unlike the Highway 85 corridor, the commercial and industrial parcels in Franktown do not have an interim water and sewer overlay district, which permits them to develop without central services when a proposed use has low water and septic demands. For this reason, waiver requests are brought forward to the board on a case-by-case basis. The applicant's well permit is sufficient to supply the water needed for the business use, and the on-site wastewater treatment system will be operated in accordance with Tri-County Health Department regulations. Should the board find that the approval standards for the waiver have been met, the following proposed conditions should be considered for inclusion in the motion. 1, all other standards and permits associated with the currently proposed site improvement plan application shall be met prior to final approval. 2, should uses be added to the site in the future for which water or sewer demands would increase, a subsequent request for a waiver shall be required. And staff has added the board standard condition of approval as proposed in condition number 3. Please note that this condition was not in your staff report. This condition reads, all commitments and promises made by the applicant or the applicant's representative during the public meeting and or agreed to in writing and included in the public record have been relied upon by the Board of County Commissioners in approving the application. Therefore, such approval is conditioned upon the full satisfaction of all commitments and promises. Section 122 of the zoning resolution sets forth the parameters of the board decision of the waiver request, available for any questions that the board may have.
Thank you, Jamie. Questions for staff?
I have none, thank you.
And I have none, Mr. Chair.
Jamie, you referenced one of our, maybe it's an overlay district we have in Sedalia. And could you go back over that, because is that, we do not have that in the Franktown area, or because this is a low use application that it wouldn't apply?
Both. We do not have that overlay district in Franktown, which does require them to go through the waiver process when they do have a low water demand.
Okay, very good. Thank you for that clarification. No further questions? Mr. Westfall, we'd like to address the board. If you would state your name, spell your last name and address for the record.
Good afternoon, Alan Westfall, 7964 Kelty Trail, Franktown, Colorado.
Thank you, sir. Anything you would like to add to the presentation?
I think staff did a good job of presenting it. If you have any questions, we're here to answer it. Also, Dr. Swakowski is here. If you have any questions of him, and also our civil consultants here.
Okay. And there are 3 conditions of approval stated in the presentation. Are you in agreement with those 3 conditions of approval?
We are, yes.
Thank you, sir. Any questions for the applicant?
I have none.
And I have none.
And I have none. Thank you, Mr. Westfall.
Thank you.
This time, I'll open up for the audience. Anyone in the audience like to address the board regarding this application? Please come forward. Seeing no one, we'll close public comment. Bring it back to the board for any further discussion and or motion.
Mr. Chair, I'll make a motion to approve a waiver of the requirements for central water and central sewer services for the commercial zone district for Burning Tree Square Lot 6A with the 3 conditions as presented. Project file SP 2019-108.
Second.
We have a first and a second. No further discussion. All in favor, state aye.
Aye.
Aye. The motion passes. Congratulations. Thanks, sir.
Thank you.
Our next item is a resolution approving the First Amendment to the Consolidated Service Plan for Pinery Commercial Metropolitan District Number 1 and Pinery Commercial Metropolitan District Number 2. This is project file SV 2019-003. Presenting for staff, Lauren Pulver.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. The project before you is a Service Plan First Amendment for the Pinery Commercial Metropolitan Districts 1 and 2. The project number is SB 2019-003. I'm Lauren Pulver, representing Community and Resource Services. The applicant is Pinery Commercial Metropolitan District, represented by Blair DeConer. The request is for approval of a service plan amendment for the Pinery Commercial Metropolitan Districts Number 1 and Number 2. The amendment request is to increase the district's debt limit and mill levy cap. The Board of County Commissioners created and adopted guidelines for processing and reviewing special district service plan applications, the intent of which is to provide for the process and review of service plan applications. The process begins with the submittal of an application. The request is prepared by staff and forwarded to referral agencies for comment. Staff further analyzes the request, and the applicant has the opportunity to resolve any issues identified through the referral period. Following public notice, the request is heard before the Board of County Commissioners. The districts are located in the northeast portion of the county, identified in the 2040 Comprehensive Master Plan as the Pinery Separated Urban Area. The districts outlined in red on the slide are located on the west side of Highway 83, south of the town of Parker. This is a map of the district boundaries. The site was zoned planned development. Pinery Commercial Metropolitan Districts Number 1 and Number 2 were approved in 2005. The developer and owner of the property within the districts have updated the development plans for the project area and have determined that the current service plan does not provide sufficient debt capacity to finance the public improvements that are needed. The district's original mill levy cap is 50 mills. The proposed First Amendment will increase the total mill levy cap to 60 mills, 50 of which will be for debt service and 10 will be for operations and maintenance. The First Amendment will increase the debt limit from $10 million to $55 million, with estimated infrastructure costs of $33 million. The First Amendment includes the addition of a mill levy cap roll-off provision without requiring a material modification to the service plan. The Colorado revised statutes specify criteria for approval of special district service plans. The Board of County Commissioners must consider the following 9 criteria in evaluating the service plan. The board shall disapprove the service plan unless there is evidence sufficient to meeting the following 4 criteria. In response to number 1, the area encompassed by the district's boundaries is zoned and planned for commercial development. The market demand analysis provided by the applicant anticipates continued growth and a need for commercial development in the area. Number 2, at the time the original service plan was approved, services for the proposed development were inadequate. The property is currently served by the districts and no changes were proposed for the existing services. Number 3, based on comments from the county's financial consultant, the service plan demonstrates that the districts can provide these services economically. Number 4, the county's financial consultant was satisfied that there is a reasonable expectation that the districts would be able to discharge the debt incurred in a reasonable time frame. The board may disapprove the service plan unless there is evidence sufficient to meeting the following 5 criteria. Number 5, operations and maintenance of wastewater and water improvements will continue to be the responsibility of the Pinery Water and Wastewater District. Other services and improvements under the original service plan will be provided by the districts. No other entity is able or willing to provide such services within a reasonable time or on a comparable basis. Number 6, all facilities will be constructed in accordance with all applicable standards. Number 7, the service area of the district falls within the Pinery Separated Urban Area of the 2040 Comprehensive Master Plan. The districts and the land use for the area are in compliance with the 2040 Comprehensive Master Plan. Number 8, at the time the original service plan was approved, the districts were in compliance with the state's Clean Water Plan. Number 9, at the time the original service plan was approved, the property required services from either an adjacent municipality, an adjoining district, or a new district. The districts will continue to provide services to existing and proposed development. Staff assesses that should the board find the application complies with the 2040 Comprehensive Master Plan and the criteria in Title 32, the service plan amendment may be approved. This concludes staff's presentation. I'm available for any questions that you have. The county's financial consultant, Jim Mann, is also available to answer any questions that the board may have. Unless there are any questions for staff at this time, the applicant representative is here is prepared to present the details of the request.
Any questions for staff?
I have none.
I'll reserve my questions for the applicant's presentation.
Okay, very good. And I have none. Thank you, Lauren. applicant's representative like to address the board? I saw a name up there, but I didn't catch it. So if you would like to state your name, spell your last name for the record, and provide your address.
Good afternoon, Blair Dickhoner with the law firm Waiver, Ankley, Tanaka, and Waldron. Last name is Dickhoner, Dickhoner. Lauren's pulling up the presentation we have, so I'll give her a second on that. With me this afternoon is Craig Campbell from Starwood, as well as Craig Veldhuisen from Piper Sandler. They can also answer questions for you this afternoon. Lauren did a good job of covering the background on what provides the authority for the service plan amendment today. So I won't go through that in detail, but it's under Title 32. As she mentioned, there's a county process in place for reviewing an amendment. This slide details the steps we've taken thus far. As you can see here, we started back in October of last year. We've had several back and forth with staff to try and address comments from staff as well as your financial consultant. All that should be in your packet, the letters with the background details. As was covered, we're asking for an increase to the total mill levy cap. This would push the debt service mill levy from 40 mils to 50 mils, and it would keep the operations maintenance mill levy at 10 mils. So a total cap of 60 mils as opposed to the total cap of 50 right now. We're also asking for an increase in the debt capacity to 55 million. And you'll hear a little bit more about the increased public improvement costs that are necessitating that. An additional clarification we're making in the service plan is to include that PIF revenue can be used to support any bonding. It's a commercial project, and it's anticipated there will be a public improvement fee that will be imposed. You can see in the proposed First Amendment, we've updated exhibits, which include updated cost estimates, the amended financing plan, as well as an administrative services agreement between district numbers 1 and 2. This determines how services are provided on an ongoing basis between the two districts. There was a previous intergovernmental agreement in place between those districts that's been superseded now, and this is the current form in place. You can see the project here. I'll have Craig Campbell from Starwood give you a little bit of background on the development and some of the changes that have occurred since 2005.
Thank you, Mr. Dickhoner.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. Craig Campbell, 385 Inverness Parkway, Inglewood, Colorado, 80112. Thank you for your time this afternoon. I'm sorry.
Spelling last name.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes. Last name is spelled Campbell. Thank you. Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you again for your time this afternoon. As you can see, this map here just lays out the district boundaries. We do sit adjacent to Highway 83 on Parker Road there, and we go west down towards Cherry Creek. The little bit of the carve out in the center there is the Pinery Water and Sanitation facilities that reside there. A little bit of the history on the project. Four Star, prior to our acquisition, Four Star was another development entity that did own the property. And I believe they did actually start the first service plan. So that was in 2005. I think they did acquire it roughly at that time. We acquired it in 2018 and have since started moving that forward. If you recall, last December, we were here getting the final approval on the filing 1 final plat. So we appreciate that. That was approved, and then the construction drawings are all complete for that. We have actually submitted the filing 2, which is the northern portion of the property, and that is in for review right now with staff, and we're processing that forward at this time as well. With the filing 1 plat being finalized and our anticipation of filing 2 coming fairly soon behind that, we are starting negotiations with some of the key tenants to start to kind of determine how the project's going to be coming to life. So that's been exciting. As stated previously, we are asking for, obviously, the increase in the debt capacity due to the increase in construction costs. And this comes about in a number of manners. The original service plan, since that time, we did a line-by-line comparison on the unit costs that were provided in that original plan versus projects we've bid out in the last 6 to 12 months here in the Douglas County area for the same type of work. And it surprised me, but the costs were up about 265%. So it's that alone, just the development costs themselves and the materials have really increased in the 15 years. The initial budget, as you can see, also did exclude some items. It didn't show any cost estimates for landscaping. It didn't have cost estimates for dry utilities. And then some of the PD commitments that are a part of this project, they also did not have included in that cost estimate. So at this time, our new cost estimate does take those into account. And just as a kind of a ballpark figure, the landscaping and dry utilities and those PD commitments alone are about $7.5 million, and the original cost estimates were about $8.5 million. So just those line items that were excluded almost come up to that original cost estimate. And again, as I stated, we have actually carried the project forward at this time and have some very detailed construction plans to do those takeoffs from. One of the items that has kind of come forward is some significant storm water improvements that have to occur that are a part of these budgets that weren't anticipated previously as well. So there's some good detail to our budgets, whereas prior, the service plan was first initiated, they were just going off of sketch plans at that time. Thank you. We'll have Craig Veldhuizen will be speaking kind of to the financing plan itself and the market study that we utilized to drive that market plan.
Thank you, Mr. Campbell.
Good afternoon. My name is Craig Veldhuizen with Piper Sandler. Our office address is 1200 17th Street, Suite 1250 in Denver, 80202.
Spelling of your last name, please.
V as in Victor, Eldhuizen. My first name's spelled a little differently too. It's Creig, not A. Is there a clicker here? Oh, great. All right, thank you. I just have a couple of things to go through in support of the request today. Just touching on the market study that underpins the plan. It was completed by THK Associates. My guess is you've seen their name before in other applications. Well-established firm, been around since 1969. They're experts in real estate market research, both in the public and private markets. Do quite a bit of commercial. That's their focus is more on the commercial side. Obviously, being a commercial project, we thought that was important. The study is a fairly detailed demand analysis across all property types and product types that are allowed within the in the zoning and design for the site, including retail, industrial, flex, office, hotel, self-storage, and potential recreation uses as well. So they have forecast the vertical absorption year by year, and that is the foundation. Those absorption projections are the foundation of our financial plan, of course. And their projections show a build out of the project over a 10-year period. So it's a long-term project, and as we know, a lot can happen just in a week, as we know from the last couple of weeks, but 10 years, certainly a lot can happen as well. Just to summarize the market study, we believe it to be well-constructed with assumptions that are grounded in market parameters and reasonable in their assumptions. Just some high-level comments about the financing plan. The scenario that we've included as part of the application is just one scenario. Clearly, I always like to tell my clients that we're going to be exactly wrong with that one scenario, but it gives you a data point to go on, of course. And ultimately, the financing plan that we undertake, while that's a blueprint for us, what we've submitted, ultimately the future economic and capital markets conditions would dictate what that looks like. And also, of course, any financing plan that we would undertake will be within the confines of the service plan as amended and what we're asking today. So those are our guardrails, our framework. And in terms of I mentioned the build out, the 10-year build out. This plan, approving this plan, provides us with the flexibility we will need to finance the infrastructure over this long-term 10-year build out as market conditions no doubt will change, demands will change. We don't know what the next Amazon is. We don't know what is going to happen out there in the retail market. So having some flexibility within the constructs of the service plan for us to complete our financing is, we think, important. Just to wrap up some of the highlights of the plan itself, I've mentioned this already. Our plan is built on the THK forecast. We are currently proposing a bond issuance, timing the first bond issuance for 2021. That is, of course, completely driven by the market in terms of the retail demand on the site, whether Craig and his group are able to secure an anchor tenant out there or other uses that drive the underlying economics of the project. We estimate the initial bond issuance to be $42.6 million and yielding $29.4 net proceeds once you account for issuance cost, capitalized interest, and reserves. Just a real quick comment about current market rates. They're at an all-time low if you follow the capital markets, not only on the Treasury side, but certainly municipal rates are an all-time low. It's an interesting time, especially this week. However, we've assumed some pretty conservative rates in this plan. If you notice, I believe that I used a 5 or 5.5%. Let me make sure I don't steer you wrong. Actually, 5.75% on the senior bonds and 7.5% on the subs. So relative to rates today, we're seeing deals that are similar in terms of risk profile trade in the markets at a 4.5% or even less on the senior side. That the subordinate bond at 7.5 is still kind of sticky. It's kind of hanging out there. So in that range. The debt service coverage ratio we've assumed is 1.5 times. The skinnier you get with that metric, the more aggressive you're being in your bond projections. And so we feel like 1.5, given the various revenue streams we have in the long-term nature of the build out of the project and what needs to happen out there, we feel like that's also conservative in terms of the underwriting and the bond sizing. So this, I've already touched on this next point. Really, the marketability of the debt is a function of the progress that the developer makes out there in terms of landing those retail clients or other uses to drive property tax. But even more important to the financial plan is driving some of the PIF revenue. That's a significant source of revenue that certainly the retail mix will be the primary driver of that. The last point is, if you haven't heard of Piper Sandler, we're the municipal advisor to the district. We used to be Piper Jaffray, changed our name as of January 3rd. But we are not the underwriter on this project. We are the municipal advisor. So just wanted to point that out. And questions?
Thank you, Mr. Veldhuizen. Did I get that correct?
Veldhuizen, yes.
Veldhuizen, okay, thank you, sir. I think we'll probably have some questions, and so I don't know if we address them to Mr. Dickoner first, and it might be appropriate to individuals as we go through. So would any commissioner like to address any questions at this time?
I do. I reviewed the packet, and part of this is interesting because we're hearing from a lot of citizens, private business owners right now, and certainly from a variety of individuals within the community, certainly seeing a lot of reports in the media, certainly the Denver Post article that we saw in December about metro districts. And I think there's an increased level of scrutiny around issuing debt to pay for infrastructure. I think We're very well aware of how important it is to have that debt issued to pay for much needed infrastructure, and we certainly value the partnership that we have with our special districts and metro districts to be able to accomplish many of these goals. In the packet, there was a reference from Ehlers with regard to return on investment and insufficient data to really provide a conclusion with regard to whether this made sense. Can you speak to that, Mr. Deconer? Is there more information you can provide?
I'll let Craig answer that. Craig Campbell, that's a developer question.
Thank you, Commissioner. Yeah, again, those come to be real proprietary types of information, and looking at returns. It's also a balance of the risk that we take as well that doesn't get accounted for. So when we buy the property, we've got money into it. We've spent millions of dollars in getting things processed and entitled, with the hope that, the market will be there. I will say though, without district financing, the land would be in a negative value, because the costs are so extensive to do these types of developments, that the land value itself, with the improvements that we can get for in the market, would make that a negative factor. So, without divulging, don't have the full business plan in front of us, what those final metrics look like. But again, there's a context to that, and I want to make sure we understand there's a risk along with that and how those returns work.
Absolutely. We just want to make sure that we're fully addressing for our citizens and certainly the business sector as well, some of these considerations. In the Ehlers correspondence, they reference a paragraph 8 and indicate without an accounting of full sources and uses, which can remain insulated from Cora requests if provided directly to Ehlers and summarized to the county, we believe it remains difficult to justify the use of future taxpayer dollars and the PIF as being necessary to the success of the development. So I don't know if you wanted to speak to that or if there's any more information.
Yeah, and again, similar concepts. I think that we have to be careful on how those are looked at from a total broad picture of looking at a simple return does not account for the full broad picture, again, of the investment, the time of the holding of the project, the risks that go along with that. We, again, take the current market conditions that we're seeing in the last 2 weeks of what happens and as a developer and speculative type of development that we take, those risks really, don't show in those types of pro formas.
Okay, thank you.
I do have a question for you, Mr. Campbell. And I don't know if you can answer this, but I'll ask it anyway. Is it your intent to develop this property, and you talked about having tenants, as opposed to developing this property and then selling it to other individuals?
We're looking at all of those types of options. The property of this magnitude and size, we will have variable different types of users. We'll have a lot of retail users, as we've discussed. We'll have some office space. We will have some industrial space. So there could be a broad mix of some parcels we will sell off and let that be a land-owned parcel. There'll be some parcels that we might do land leases and build the facility and lease those out. So there's, again, with our pro formas, we do a number of different things kind of based on where we see the market conditions going.
The reason I ask that question is I understand part of this request is to approve a service plan that allows you later on to increase the mills on the property without coming back to the board for approval. Is that correct?
No, the mills would be, that we're asking for today would be the fixed mills. They wouldn't be increased
ever
after that. Correct.
Without coming back to the board?
Correct. Well, yeah, your service plan, correct me if I'm wrong, Blair and Laura, your service plan documents are stipulated in that way as well for that protection.
Okay, thank you. I'm sorry I misunderstood that. When I read through the packet on page 86 of the packet, and this is the staff packet that collected all the information up front for us, it did say that says ultimately Ehlers concluded that there is reasonable expectation that the districts would be able to discharge the debt incurred at a reasonable time frame. So that was in our packet, and I'll be looking forward to hearing from Mr. Mann in regard to that statement.
Yes, and honestly, as Mr. Veldhuizen had stated, we hired them as a financial consultant, a third party to also review these types of items for us on behalf of the district. That normally isn't the case, nor has that been more historically in the Colorado market, where you have the difference between a financial advisor, which Mr. Veldhausen's group is, versus the underwriter, the entity that actually goes out and underwrites the bonds and sells the bond in the market. We've hired Mr. Veldhausen's team to analyze everything up front to make sure, with conservative metrics, as he mentioned, that this project can proceed forward under this service plan. So we wanted that protection and have asked for that and have provided that.
Thank you, Mr. Campbell.
Thank you.
Mr. Campbell, if I'm reading it correctly, the necessary improvements that you're looking at are somewhere around 33 million.
That's correct, yes.
Okay. And in the bonds you're looking, I'm going to just round it up, roughly 43 million, but with a yield of about 29 million. So there's about a $4 million delta in there. Can you explain that?
Yeah, I'll actually let Mr. Veldhausen do that, but it is the difference there is that's we would have to cover that delta, the developer would. Again, based on the pro forma metrics of the bond sale, how that would work out with the 29 million as proceeds to go towards the 33 million. So the developer would cover that difference.
Okay. Very well. Any further questions for the applicant at this time?
I have none.
I did have one other question, and I think Piper Sandler would be the ones to answer the question, the business. So on page 303 of the packet, it talks about the PIF of 1.75%. And then it goes on to say that the projected sales tax rate for this area would be 1.64% lower than the other projected taxes in the area. So does that mean that even though the PIF will be in place, the marketplace there would still be competitive because of the lower tax rate?
That's exactly what that means. We purposely put a plan together to make the project more attractive than the surrounding area, and did some of that benchmarking analysis to arrive at 1.75% versus, I believe it's a 3% PIF, correct? So we have a maximum of 3%. But you know, I think for the Pinery project to have a competitive advantage right next to Parker, I think having a lower tax rate certainly plays into that.
Thank you for explaining that. Thank you.
An additional question regarding other districts, because I tried to look onto the taxing authorities right now, and Parker Water and Sanitation District is not listed as a taxing, they're a taxing district, but there's no tax present. So would that be included in the mills, and then the developer will be paying Parker and Water? Because I'm just concerned if you're going to 50 mil and then you have, I think you have your answer, I'm just trying to explain it in my head, that you would have your 50 mil, but then would Parker Water and Sand have their additional mill, or is that included in your 50 mil?
So we're not in the Parker Water and Sand district area. We're in the Pinery Water and Sand Sanitation District.
Sorry.
So
I said that wrong. Thank you.
Just to make certain, right, correct. So yes, our mill levy is in addition to the other additional property taxes that are on there. And going to the 50 mills on the debt service side, we still are competitive. We've done that same analysis, similar to the sales tax analysis, with other properties that we would be competing against in the areas with similar district structures.
So the Pinery Water Wastewater Mill would be in addition to your 50?
Their property tax mill would be.
Right, okay.
But when you add up the total mills on the property taxes, including the pineries, including the county, including our 50 mil, we are competitive to the other commercial projects that we believe we'll be competing with in the Castle Rock areas, up north towards Lone Tree and Parker, and those areas as well.
So, President, if I read this right, you're roughly around 132 mills now. Could go up another 10 mills then, if this is accepted.
Let's look at that to make sure, correct.
So I'm using the county assessor website
Assessor
to look at
website,
that.
right.
And in that, I didn't see that the Pinery, since they're not serving right now, that they didn't have a mill listed.
And I need to check if they have a mill levy, quite honestly, Commissioner, I apologize if I misspeak, because we'll be paying fees to them, and the residents will be paying, or I'm sorry, the commercial users will be paying use fees for the water and sewer. So I don't believe there would be a mill levy that they would have. Because all the mills on your website would be applicable, the county assessor's website are applicable. If they're not showing, then they don't have a mill. The water and sanitation district would not.
Okay.
Yeah. Does that answer your question, though? I might have confused you further. I apologize.
No, I think it's, now just to help understand a little bit, that, and I can pull it up here if I get a second, but I would imagine that a residence served by the Pinery would have a mill. So I'm wondering why wouldn't a commercial property have a mill from the Pinery? And I don't know that. I'll check and see if I can.
Yeah, I'm going to try and do the same here on.
I don't know specifically about their revenue streams, but it's not uncommon for a water district to survive on fees alone without the property tax mill levy. I mean, occasionally there's a small mill levy, but a lot of times it's just a fee structure.
Katie or Lauren, do you have any information on that?
This is Katie Ryder for staff. In looking online at the residential areas in the Pinery, it also looks like they're levied at 0 mills. So the Pinery could very well be a fee-based water and sanitation district in total. Without actually looking at their financials at this point in time, we cannot confirm that, but based on what we're seeing on the assessor's page, it looks like they're fee-based.
Okay. And Mr. Campbell, is there any water service to the property now?
So there's a small, I'm not sure we can go back to our map, there's a small portion on the south side of Pinery Parkway as you come into the project that was part of Pinery West filing number 2, which was the KB home community right there. There's 4 commercial lots there that actually have water service to them from Pinery Water and Sanitation District. And then as you can see, there's no development on our parcel. There are some water and sanitary lines that run to the facility within our, adjacent to our property that are part of the Pinery water system. And we will be tying into those plus developing our own lines to serve our property with their approval of those. They have to approve those water lines and sewer lines as they'll be turned over to them.
So then
we do have a will serve from Parker Water, Pinery Water and Sanitation.
Thank you for helping me on that.
Yeah.
So then okay,
So
sure.
quick, I did find the financial statements, so the budget for 2020 for Pinery, water and wastewater. There is no tax revenue shown in their budget. It looks like completely use fees between water and sewer services as well as some tap fees.
Okay.
There's no tax revenue that I see on their budget, so I just wanted to share that.
Okay. So then the water and sanitation fees would either be through a lease, or if there's an actual purchase of a property, that would be up to the property owner.
Correct, right, yeah.
And I do show the 132.334 mils, what appears to be in that general vicinity of the present. Okay, thank you. Any further questions for the applicant at this time?
I have none.
I have none further for the applicant, but I have a few for staff
Okay.
and perhaps our consultant.
All right. I think what we'll do, we'll open up for public comment. Questions? Does anyone in the audience like to address the board regarding this application? Seeing none, we'll close public comment. And Mr. Layden, would you like to ask your questions?
I would. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Is Mr. Mann here from Ehlers? So perhaps I think the initial consideration might be directed to council. Mr. Ingalls, can you elucidate for us whether or not first of all, based on the staff packet, it's clear that this is a primarily financial consideration. For that reason, it was elevated from the planning board up to the Board of County Commissioners. But can you elucidate for us the ability of this board to review the financial considerations as part of our criteria? And I'm specifically looking at number 9 in the May under the approval criteria. I'm a bit hung up on district will be in the best interest of the area to be served. And so I'm looking at those financial considerations in light of that particular approval criteria.
I will start to try and address that. I will also ask Megan Taggart to weigh in if she believes it's appropriate. She has more special district experience than anyone else in my office. That said, if you look at the draft resolution that's been prepared for you, and these factors are a summary of that draft resolution, these are statutory factors. So these are factors the board has to consider in either approving a service plan or an amendment to a service plan, in this case, a material modification and consolidation of a service plan. The finance plan is simply part of the service plan, and it's something the board must consider to the point that it satisfies these approval criteria, again, which are statutory. So to the extent that you have questions that helps you get to yes or no on those particular criteria, I believe you're authorized to ask them.
Okay, thank you. I could get to yes if I had more information, but I think in many ways the questions that I have speaks to some of the systemic issues that we're hearing about in the public about wanting more accountability, more transparency, more clarity with regard to the operations and intent of Metro District financing. So, Mr. Mann, in your correspondence from January 30th of this year that I referenced earlier, can you provide a little bit more detail in terms of your perspective? And again, just to refresh for the record, you indicated without an accounting of full sources and uses which can remain insulated from core requests, we believe it remains difficult to justify the use of future taxpayer dollars and the PIF as being necessary to the success of the development. We really rely upon the expertise of our consultants, you in particular when it comes to public finance, and so that comment from you stands out to me. Do you have any further detail on that?
The detail that I would offer is that I think, let me just take a step back and talk about the overall plan. And the overall plan itself is I would say, well-crafted. I think one of the key considerations that was made in terms of, we talk about it as a coverage ratio. So for every dollar of debt service you're paying, what do you have available to make that debt service payment? And when we talk metropolitan districts and we see a coverage ratio of $1.50 for every dollar that needs to be spent in debt service, we rarely see a plan crafted to that extent. So from a purely dollars and cents perspective, the plan as it's before you today is fairly conservative, and I think it certainly falls within the finance pieces that there's going to be financial ability to discharge the debt and that there's a fair economy in terms of providing the services. Where we come down and we start raising some considerations is more on the may side of the equation. And this is when you look at the construct of the statute, you've got the shalls where you have to do it, and the mays where if it's a policy decision of a governing entity to look at certain other types of information, it's well within your bounds to do it. And when we look at the statement that I put in there, it's very hard for us to, without seeing the full sources and uses and accounting of a project, to know how much they spent on the land, how much revenue is going to be coming in over time. Did they really need that financial support to move forward with the plan and have a reasonable rate of return for their investment? As was stated by the proponent, there is risk involved, and that risk carries a certain return on an investment that's going to come back to that proponent. The question is, and the question that we can't answer succinctly one way or the other, is whether that return is reasonable. And, you know, it could be in a very hot market, you might be looking at something that's in, you know, a 10% range. In a market where you're looking that you've got some uncertainty going forward, maybe that return on investment is much higher. When you look at a protracted build-out period, you've got to plan for some ups and downs in the economy. So it's a balancing act in terms of where you would end up on that return on investment. But from our perspective, without seeing that information, we can't make a statement one way or the other that it would fall within that reasonable level of a return.
Okay, so that's helpful, and I understand that by statute the applicant isn't required to disclose or provide that proprietary information. I think it was pretty well articulated why they would not want to do that. However, I think it's an important consideration that you raise, which is, do they need the financial support, and is the ROI reasonable? And without the information, I would have to agree with your analysis, which is it's really hard to reach a conclusion. So I'm still struggling a little bit with this.
Additional questions for Mr. Mann?
I'm going to read again on page 86 of the staff report that goes through and summarizes the information. And it talks about how you commented on the use of the PIF, and we've talked about the PIF and the sales tax differential. And again, the last sentence says, ultimately, Ehlers concluded that there is reasonable expectation that the districts would be able to discharge the debt incurred in a reasonable time frame. Do you agree with that statement?
I do.
Can you articulate why?
The reason I say that there's a reasonable expectation is really it gets back to that debt service coverage. With a 1.5 times debt service coverage, this project can be in a position to discharge that debt that it's going to incur, even if there's a slowdown, because there's a significant amount of excess revenue that's being counted on coming into the district to be able to be used in the event that we have a downturn. So from a purely dollars and cents perspective in terms of debt, we feel very strongly that the plan is crafted in such a manner that you certainly would be able to discharge the debt in a reasonable time frame. And then I think added to that, and who knows how long this market is going to last the way it is, but we've seen interest rates come down significantly, and the rates that are included in the primary debt issuance at 5 3/4% are significantly higher than what the market would bear currently.
Thank you, Mr. Mann.
And so I see that as two different distinct considerations, but correct me if I'm wrong. I understand and would agree that based upon the information provided, the applicant certainly could discharge the proposed indebtedness. But to your point, that doesn't answer the question of do they need it to begin with?
It does not, and that's the difference, or that's the nuance between the 4 shalls and the 5 mays. The mays are discretionary to each governing organization as to whether they're going to apply and what type of information that they're going to require to come to the conclusions that they can meet those criteria.
Okay, that's helpful for me. And again, in the absence of information, I don't think it's possible for me to be able to have a sense of comfort with this particular application.
Further questions for Mr. Mann? Thank you, Mr. Mann.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Are we able to respond?
Yes, certainly.
Thank you. Do I need to say my name again?
Just your name, just so you. No,
Greg
so-
Veldhuisen with Piper.
Thank you.
I can appreciate the trepidation in the current environment and the questions and the line of question. I can certainly appreciate that. I guess what I would ask the commissioners is more of a philosophical question. What is a reasonable rate of return? You know, who determines that? And I think you get into a slippery slope when you have applicants coming who are investing their own equity capital, taking risk, and doing economic development within the county's boundaries. And they may run into a policy-making body that says you can only make this much money or this much money. Lay out an example or a scenario. What if landowner had purchased the property at the height of the market, so their cost basis is really high? Conversely, what if the property owner had purchased it out of bankruptcy, and so their basis is really low, but they've held it for a period of time and ridden the market up? They've got a lot more profit and a lot more return under that scenario. However, the fact remains that but for their risk-taking and but for their equity going into the project, nothing happens, right? So I guess what I'm trying to communicate to the body is maybe consider that gets into a realm that could be controversial and have some unintended negative consequences, maybe to not only my client and their district, but maybe broader perspective. The other thing I would point out or ask you to consider is that the greater benefit of this project is job creation, certainly in the area, bringing retailers, bringing jobs, bringing commerce to that area will certainly drive its own economic activity. Clearly, it'll provide some sales tax to the county as well through that process. And the last point I want to make is that the PIF itself has been approved. Guys, how long has the PIF been approved? 2005? So we're not asking for a new PIF. It's been in place since 2005. The covenant of the property has been there. All that we're asking is, can we use that PIF toward the financing package in a different way that the service plan doesn't allow right now? So that will be a catalyst. It'll be a Kickstarter for Starwood Land and the district to get this project going and bringing in more commerce in the area.
So thank you for that. And I would say philosophically, I agree 100%. I think there's, from at least my perspective as one commissioner, there should be no limit to how successful you can be. And we have a lot of respect for our metro districts, our developers and individuals and entities and businesses that take on that enterprise risk to bring something new into the community. So no question there. Where it gets challenging is that intermingling of public infrastructure and the impact of increased taxes for our businesses, for our small business owners, and for our citizens. And I'll tell you, anecdotally, I heard from a citizen just this last week, and without providing specific details, a small business owner in our community that has, we'll say, a $90,000 tax bill, and about $30,000 of that was going to the Metro District. He couldn't access any information related to the Metro District, couldn't get their attention, didn't have access to information where that money went, and had a really hard time with that transparency piece. not to mention the fact that he couldn't pay the taxes. Now, that's nobody's fault. Perhaps it's his. I'm a big believer in individual responsibility, but I think it speaks to that theme that we're hearing more loudly in our community about the burden of taxation and the need for transparency with our special districts and metro districts. So hopefully that's a conversation that can continue in partnership with the wonderful metro districts and developers in our community. I think there's some desire to do that, but lack of information makes it very difficult for us, at least me, to reach any conclusion. And so when I hear that there's not the information needed from our financial consultant to reach a conclusion, it poses challenges in my mind.
Blair Dick-Honer again. If I could just quickly touch on the transparency issue. I think there's been a great disservice in some of the inaccurate reporting that's been out there in some of the news stories we're all familiar with. There's a lot of transparency out there on districts. Maybe it's a matter of educating people where to find it. But budgets, mill levies, audits, all that financial information is out on publicly available websites. So anyone who's doing their proper due diligence can find it. It's not a hide the ball. I understand there are anecdotal situations where people don't feel like they get the information they need, but there's a lot of statutory and regulatory requirements in place to provide that.
Sure. No, we know it's all available on DOLA, but we're all sophisticated individuals that can have access to that. I mean, we're hearing from small business owners that are a bit less sophisticated, that may go to some metro district meetings where it's mostly individuals connected with the development community, and then they go into executive session and feel like they don't have access to information. So it's an interesting conversation, and I know that there are statutory abilities that metro districts have to protect themselves and move forward. And again, I get it. You're taking significant enterprise risks, so we want to honor that, honor our metro districts. But I think accountability and transparency to our citizens is really important. And maybe it does come down to more education, but now we're talking a philosophical policy approach as opposed to the application, but well taken.
And certainly that's something the county can and maybe should revisit on the policy standpoint of, are there ways to improve transparency in education? I would just request that we don't lump the specifics of this project into a broader policy discussion.
I get it. Thank you.
Mr. Dick-Honer, Ms. Campbell, I have an additional question. The PIF, is there a time limit on the PIF, years limit on the PIF?
I don't believe there is. It's a private covenant recorded against the property, so it's not recorded by the Metro District. I have to go back and look at the actual covenant that put it in place. But I don't believe there is. Do you know, Craig? Okay. Yeah, I don't believe so.
Okay. And I don't think it's an unusual thing to have a time limit. I know Park Meadows Mall had it, a 10-year period. They actually paid that off. I think it was in 6 years. So, that's just a concern that it's a continual way to put some additional taxation on there. But.
Yeah, and if there had been a 10-year time limit put in place back in 2005, it would have expired by now. So some of that's for flexibility for a long-term development project like this.
Right. But there is the option for you to remove the TIF at your own discretion, at least to not remove the ability to TIF, but to remove the TIF.
Yeah, the PIF, yeah.
The PIF.
Yep.
PIF. I'm sorry. Yep. Nope, you guys aren't doing the TIF. The PIF. I appreciate that.
I'm talking
Thank
about
you.
that today.
Yes. And staff, is an election okay. I'm going to ask this question. Is an election required for this, a November election required for this?
It's on the bottom.
Megan Taggart from the County Attorney's Office. The applicant might be in a better position to answer whether they need election approval for, and to clarify, is this the debt increase or the mill levy increase?
I would say either or.
Okay. So the district has the ability to assess and levy taxes. It is likely that they may have already gone to an election and may not be required to go to an election in November for the authorization. They just would not be able to impose the amount that they are requesting through the service plan amendment unless and until the service amendment is approved.
Blair DeConer again. That's correct. So we had an initial election back in 2005, and then we've had a subsequent election, I believe, 2 years ago to refresh some of that debt authorization. So there's sufficient authorization for the mill levy as well as the debt under that election.
Thank you. Mr. Ingles?
Yeah, Commissioner Thomas, you asked a question a little while ago about ability to increase the mill levy, and we might have a little bit of a disconnect with the applicant on that item. So Megan, could you come up to the podium? My understanding is this is called a roll-off provision. It's on page 5 of the revised service plan. It's proposed a little bit different by this applicant than we're used to seeing, and we do interpret it as an ability to increase the mill levy. So Megan, could you address that provision?
Sure. This is Megan Taggart from the County Attorney's Office. I believe that the question was asked was regarding the ability of the district to increase its taxes, its mill levy caps, I should say. And the purpose of this amendment is because an increase of the mill levies as approved in their original service plan is a material modification. The district has included a provision, as was noted by staff, that is called a roll-off provision that would allow the district to essentially eliminate the maximum debt service mill levy cap when the outstanding debt that is that the mill levy is pledged to becomes less than 50% of the assessed valuation. Now, this isn't something that's unusual. It is something that is in the county's template service plan. However, in the county's template service plan, that action would require a material modification and an additional service plan amendment, which is not something that's present with the service plan amendment and the application before you here. It would be an automatic provision.
So I appreciate that explanation because I had read the roll-off piece, and that was my question, that if the Metro District would be able to raise its own taxes without coming back to the board, this board, for approval. And what I'm hearing from you now say is that is correct. If their debt is below 50%.
In that circumstance, correct.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Ingles.
Apologize for the miscommunication or clarification we needed there. And Craig Beldheisen can speak to this too, but one of the reasons that's done is because you get a mature district and you get to a point where that debt's pretty secure and there's a lot of AV out there. By eliminating that mill levy cap, you can go out and refund at a lower rate because investors feel more secure that if property values drop significantly, you can go above that cap and keep their repayment level. So it's not a you're going to suddenly have a spike of runaway increase in taxes. It's more to compensate for a downturn in assessed valuation and make sure debt payments stay level.
And what would be the downside of coming before this board and asking for that ability to do that?
I think it just adds some predictability at this point to know that down the road the debt can be refunded without political uncertainty in the future as part of it. Just gives the service plan some certainty and gives us some predictability in refunding the debt eventually.
Thank you.
And just to that point, that is something that is already in our service plan model that we have now. It's nothing unusual.
The concept of the roll-off provision, correct, is within our service plan. It just requires a material modification and a service plan amendment in order to do so.
Very good. An additional question for Mr. Mann. So trying to address Commissioner Layden's concern brought up, and that, and I don't have the correct wording, that what would make you feel comfortable as a service plan to be able to say, yes, this passes the muster financially? Because I know we've had you before, and obviously we'd like to try and get great, objective, just straightforward. Not that you don't give straightforward answers, but we'd like to have it. Here's the answer: it's A or it's B. Which is it?
I would love to be able to stand before you and say that the developer's return on his investment is within a reasonable range of returns. And that varies from project to project to project. It varies given a wide variety of circumstances. But if we understood what that range was, and the development community is pretty open about what those ranges are, if it fits within that range, maybe it's at the higher end of the range, and there's a mitigating circumstances that says there's more risk on this project that allows that higher return. Or maybe it's on the lower end of the range, and it's because we're in a very hot real estate market and there isn't as much risk. That's a discussion that I would love to be able to have and then be able to report back to you and say it's within the range, because I think that answers the question of it's in the best interest of the people that it's going to serve. I mean, that gets to that bottom line. It really gets to a but for this amount of contribution from future taxpayers, this project wouldn't happen because it wouldn't be within a range of return that the proponent would say, I'm going to go ahead and do this project. And it really is about giving the county board the ability to defend at the end of the day a decision to say we allowed this metropolitan district to be created.
Yes,
and I think, as stated rightly, the reporting that we've all widely read in the newspapers is pretty one-sided. It's poked holes at a number of districts that had some problems. There are a whole host of districts that have been very successful and operated well within the bounds, and they haven't had those problems. So I think we have a certain mindset right now that metro districts are bad. Metropolitan districts are an absolutely fabulous economic development tool, and they are far superior to many of the other tools that I've seen used out, not just in the state of Colorado, but elsewhere. There are some tweaks that may need to happen, but I think when you look at the shalls and the mays that frame your decision-making, you have all the tools to make all the right decisions. And it's just getting the information that you as a public body want to see to get to the point where you're comfortable with the shalls and you're comfortable with the mays. And I think the last thing I'll say about it is it really is a policy decision. And I would encourage you that if this is a direction that you want to move in, that it become part of policy. And that because if it's not part of policy, then I think, and I defer to the county attorney, but basically you run the risk of having someone accuse you of being arbitrary and capricious.
Thank you, Ms. Chellers.
So that's really insightful, and I would agree with that analysis. I think, at least again, as one commissioner, I don't ever want to do something to the public or the business community or to developers. I think it's a conversation with our stakeholders around what solutions make the most sense for everybody involved. Again, I think we have some very serious competing considerations. One is, I want you to be as successful as you can be, and I don't think there should be any limit to that. I hope you're as successful as possible. Leveraging the power of government to tax always creates that alternate consideration with regard to higher taxes and fees for our small business owners and citizens. So that's what I'm wrestling with. And today I don't have enough information to reach a yes. And I'm comfortable with the shalls 1 through 4 for the most part. I'm struggling with the mays.
Commissioner Layden and Attorney Ingalls, with that, so let's concentrate, because my question was going to be, of our approval criteria, where does the rate of return concern us of the 9 before us?
I can't answer that with absoluteness for the three of you. It may fall under number 9, and that seems like the most likely place for it, which again is a discretionary factor. If it matters to you, then it matters. I guess arguably it could fit under 4, but probably not, probably more under 9. But again, if it matters to you, that's where it matters, and it's applying these criteria that helps you get to that determination.
Thank you. Mr. Campbell, I have a question for you too.
Thank you. Ms. Craig Campbell again. Again, continue to hopefully help this portion of the conversation along. The one thing in looking at number 9, the market's going to tell us what will work competitively from a taxation standpoint. I mean, obviously, we're limited at what we can tax at, which is appropriate with the roll-off provision being a separate item. The market will say whether this project is competitive, and therefore we go to sell the land and to build the facilities and or lease those facilities, we will need to adjust as the developer to what that's going to be. My return then is going to be fluctuating. I could show you a return today, or I'm sorry, one as of December 30th last year versus today, and that return is going to be night and day difference because of what's happened in the market in a very short period of time. We're talking about a project that's going to be built out, 10 years over a time period. So again, back to the philosophical definition of a fair rate of return, I don't believe that's a debatable conversation for this room. Apologize if that's offensive to anyone, but it's such so many criteria go into that. And in all my years of development as a developer in developing across the country, I have never been asked to show pro forma returns on projects when asking for government assistance in this manner. I think I say that as a position. I think there's a relativeness for that to be the case, that we haven't been asked for that, and because it is an arbitrary return. I could show you a return run by one developer on the same project, underwritten it in a different way on the same exact project. It's just all the inputs that you put into that on a pro forma, that how solid are those, how good are those? So when you look at a return at a point in time, number one, it's very arbitrary. We try to do our best, but everyone has different thoughts and inputs on what the market's going to be when we build this project out. So that aspect of it is very flexible, should we say. Yeah. So I think you had a question. I'm sorry,
You pretty well answered. I can sum it up in my closing comments.
I spent Sunday afternoon and late last night reading this because it was the most difficult of about the 1,200 pages we had to read for today's hearing. And I had a lot of questions. One of them is this roll-off. But after I understand that if the debt is below 50%, you can increase the mills, but the cost is going to stay static because there's going to be less principal that needs to be paid. So that answered the biggest question that I had. And even when I read that, the PIF of 1.75 and the 1.64 on the sales tax, I spent a lot of time reading this. And I actually am very comfortable with all of these because I understand that you would not have developed this plan that even our financial consultant has said is a conservative plan. That you have built this, you have put this together because you want to be successful. And you want to provide amenities to the citizens in the area. And you've talked about being competitive so that people will come shop at your area and not up the street in Parker. You have taken these things into consideration. And I think these are the tenets of capitalism and risk. And I support what you're doing. So I am going to be in favor of this proposal because I think that you have met the criteria that are listed before us.
want to go on a couple things first that I really appreciate how you presented it. And one was my question was, well, you know what, not, 15 years ago or so, it was $10 million was your debt limit. And the request is up to $55 million. But I think you answered a lot to me when the original plan did not include landscape, dry utilities, and we know that there can be a large expense. And then appreciate the the work you did at 265% increase in cost. And that probably doesn't include all the factors with that. So you answered that for me. I appreciate that. That was very clear. I look at one of the most important things to me when I look at what we hear as to tenants or potential tenants is, what are going to be my taxes? What's the mill, basically, you're looking at? And doing the research around the area, you are below some of the other, I would say, probably comparable commercial areas. With this, you'd only be a few mills higher than some of the other competitive, but at your new infrastructure coming up and new buildings. So there is a difference. And you have the choice to look at what kind of a building would you be building, Class A, Class B. So you look at it. That increases your marketability or decreases your marketability, and that is up to you, certainly, I would say that. The rate of return, I get a little challenge with it. I think that is a gray area for us to get into, but I appreciate it because number 9 says, is it the best interests of the area to be served? Because certainly we don't want to create the district that could fail. And that is one thing that's very, very concerning in our conversations we've had, because if the districts fail, you're going, well, we helped approve it. So if it fails, then say, now where do these individuals go that are property owners or tenants? So I do have concern on that on the rate of return, but I don't think it's an area that I want to get into from now. I really respect your approach to that. So that's kind of my take. But Commissioner Layden, I think you bring up a good point. We have to be concerned because we do want to have businesses that have the ability to be successful. But I also know there's very comparable commercial districts with a similar mill levy that are very successful. And we know that, especially now. In fact, we heard from the Castle Rock EDC today, there's just hardly anything commercially available right around Castle Rock. Now, I know this isn't Castle Rock per se, but you're almost right there. So I think from the standpoint of, from the market, there's a lot of comfort there because of where we're at right now, and we know how that can change so quick. So when I look at, one of the biggest things I really look at, I appreciate all the financials coming forward. Mr. Mann, I really appreciate your explanation. Gives me a lot of comfort too. But I think your mill levy is, even though high, it's competitive. So for me, I believe also the 9 criteria are met, even though we do have a little bit of subjectivity in there to a degree. We try to make things as objective as possible. Some of these I don't think can be objective for that reason, but I do believe the 9 have been met.
Well, that's very persuasive to me, and I have the highest level of respect for my fellow commissioners that I think we all share the same philosophy when it comes to success and wanting to be a partner to our citizens in the business community so that they can thrive. I still struggle with the lack of information and the uncertainty expressed by Ehlers and Mr. Mann. I suppose, a lot of this conversation today is in reflection on the public conversation around metro districts that we're hearing right now, citizen comment, and perhaps to Mr. Dickoner's comment, it's just a larger policy consideration. And I think having worked in the private sector as a private commercial real estate land use attorney, I know there's a level of certainty and predictability that's so necessary in the development community, and it's difficult when government is uncertain. So I think I'll concur today with my fellow commissioners and be in support of this application with the hope that we can engage with the development community, not do something to you, but with you and in conversation with you so that we can get some better solutions around how to connect with our citizens. And hopefully that'll help you. We'll hear fewer complaints, so will you, and everybody will go on their merry way. So I'll be in support today with hope for additional conversation in the future.
Any further discussion, deliberation?
I have a motion for you.
Okay.
Mr. Chair, I have a motion to approve a resolution approving the First Amendment to the Consolidated Service Plan for Pinery Commercial Metropolitan District Number 1 and Pinery Commercial Metropolitan District Number 2, project file SV 2019-003.
Second.
We have a first and a second. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all in favor state aye.
Aye.
Aye. The motion passes. Congratulations. Thank you. That concludes our items on our agenda. We are adjourned.